Welcome to the Practical Permaculture Podcast, your weekly dose of gardening, intentional living, and all things permaculture, served with a side of fun and plenty of great conversations. I'm your host, Elise, and together we'll dig into practical tips, chat with experts, and explore ways to cultivate a more abundant, sustainable life. Let's get growing. All right, so we are technically on our season break, but I thought for the next 2 weeks I will do mini episodes about the house build. I was meant to do this for the last episode, but with the cyclone coming, I didn't get a chance, and so I released an episode from next season early. So to start with, I guess people have been interested in the house build. And kind of what we're doing and what we're not doing that fits in with sustainability or ecological housing models or permaculture and viewing it from a permaculture lens. So what we're doing is actually a really big mix of traditional building methods and making some sustainable choices, all guided as much as possible by permaculture principles, but also constraints, like practical constraints that we have. So I guess to rewind, the first thing was picking the actual site. So we made sure that when we went to build on a block that we had a really good aspect. So we picked a block where we knew we could face the house or orientate the house so that north was going to be our living space as much as possible, and that the other parts of the house that we weren't in so much or that we could control the temperature more in winter were facing south. So we've put our bedrooms mainly and our bathroom on the south. Our garage is the west, so it's actually protecting us from the heat of the sun, and we've orientated the whole house slightly on a tilt from the access road to the northeast so that we get the sun coming up and being over that area majority of the day. We don't have concern here so much in winter because our winters are quite mild, but a big thing for us was being able to cool the house effectively in summer, because that was more of an issue for us than having a cold winter was. And so we jumped on a few sites. There's one called Australian Sustainable Building Practices. That's actually a government website, and it's surprisingly good for a government website. It gives you lots of information about how you can build a house sustainably, how to orientate a house, what to consider, the depth of your eaves to make sure that you're getting, shade in summer and sun coming in winter. All these kinds of things. So if that's something that you're kind of interested in, I definitely recommend jumping on that website. And then we also went on websites like SunCalc to have a look at where we place the buildings and structures on the block to know how much shade we would get in the height of summer. So summer solstice, and then how much shade and sun we would get in the depths of winter, so winter solstice. So we jumped on and made sure that, where the shed was in relation to the house, and where the wood shed was going to be, and the chicken run, and all these things that we kind of had mapped out would not shade too much of our garden. And then the other thing we really thought about was where we put the house in relation to where the best place was to grow food. That was quite important to us. We also had some immovable things on our block, like where the trees, existing big trees were, where our services were, so our water and our power, where we had to put our septic, where was the most practical and cost-effective place to put our septic. So these are all factors that we kind of had the block of land, understood the constraints we were working with, and went, okay, yes, this block will or won't work for us. I might do a separate episode on site sector analysis. So for people who either have an existing site, to do a site sector to understand how it's affected, or maybe if you are looking at relocating or purchasing some land, what to look out for, and to do a mini site sector for some of the blocks you might be considering, so that you can make a more educated decision about the block and how it will affect your house and your setup and your layout of your garden and surrounding areas. excuse me if you do hear a bit of background noise. We actually have builders on site today, and I couldn't get away to a recording studio because we're still cut off from Yamba, where the recording studio is. So hopefully they're not too noisy in the background, but we'll see how we go. All right, so moving on. The key intentional design choices were definitely aspect and orientation of the house, but also thermal mass. So we've chosen to have a concrete slab, and that means that in winter we won't probably need to rely on our reverse cycle air conditioning if we do get one, or our fireplace when we eventually install one. We do want to install one. I don't know how much use it will get through all of winter, but the slab has the capacity to heat up during the day when the sunlight hits it, and then at nighttime it will then release that warm air. It does mean in summer, though, that we've had to be very intentional about where our verandas and shade is, so that it doesn't do the same in summer where we're heating up the slab and then it's releasing more heat at night and it's a bit unbearable. So when we're talking about shade in particular, we've decided to do big pergolas on both sides of our house. So on the northern side, we'll have a massive pergola that will be uncovered. So it will be exposed, and we're going to grow a vine along that. For the first year or so, until the vine gets big enough, we will need to put some kind of shade cloth down. But once that establishes itself, we're going to have a deciduous vine so that in summer we get protected with the shade and it doesn't make our slab heat up. And then in winter, those leaves will obviously fall down and we'll be able to utilize the sun to hit the slab, like I was saying, and heat the slab and then heat the house at nighttime and release that warmth. The southern side of our house doesn't have a big pergola. It has the bathroom on one side, and then more southwest we have a pergola there, and that will be covered partially because we want to protect ourselves from the harsh, intense western sun. We don't want our bedrooms heating up, so we've put that there to protect our bedrooms. We've also put the shed behind our house, which will cop the brunt of the western sun, the direct west sun. And so that way, again, our bedrooms have a buffer from our garage and that they're able to stay hopefully relatively cool, and we won't need to have aircon in our bedrooms. We'll just utilize our windows and our fans to help keep us cool at night in summer. Other things that have come into that is ventilation. So making sure we're using windows for airflow and also shading to just, make sure that we do have cross ventilation. We do have windows up high in particular places to let the hot air out. So thinking about how windows and doors and corridors and things like that in your house work to help the airflow and ventilate, especially because it's humid up here for a fair chunk of the summer and spring when it's rainy and then it's hot. People do get issues with mold in the northern rivers, mustiness, smells, that kind of thing. So it was really important to us that we had really, really good ventilation, not just to cool the house, but to make sure that we're not getting any mold and yucky stuff in our house. And insulation. Insulation is the other thing that we actually haven't made a decision on as of yet. We know the house will be wrapped when it's first done, but the internal wall insulation, that's something I'm still researching. So that's a big one, like environmental and sustainability wise, like what choice we want to make, and voting with our hip pocket as to what we believe in, but also what's really going to be good for our area. So if you have any tips on that, feel free to shoot me a message, because yes, still looking at lots of different options with insulation, but that's a big thing that you can choose to either go synthetic or natural, and how that then affects how you live inside your house and what that feels like day to day. Now, we've lived in a straw bale house before. So my mum had a straw bale house that was mud rendered when we lived with her. It's a path that we very, very briefly looked at, mainly because time constraints. We decided not to go down that road. And also, I don't think our fairly conservative small council would be the easiest council to get that through. A lot of our choices also have been dictated by council somewhat, because we want this to be the shortest build possible for financial reasons. We need it to be. So anything that was going to be tricky to get through council, or we'd have to push and advocate for, or supply extra paperwork and information, etc., park that straight away. Having a toilet that was composting was something that I was really gunning for and really pushing. And then when I found out it was going to be tricky to get through council, we decided not to do that inside the house. So we will have a composting toilet externally, and we will use that and utilize it, but our internal toilet will be hooked up to septic, because that's just the path of least resistance in our council, and we needed to get things done as quick as possible. So yeah, timing and budget are obviously massive factors in the decision-making process, and balancing sustainability with financial feasibility, because sometimes those things can be at odds and sometimes they actually work really well and they complement each other. So it's just about, I guess, knowing what your top values are and what you kind of definitely want to be in the build and included, and knowing what things you're kind of happy to let go of as well. Going back to living in a straw bale house, it's something we toyed with because we liked the sustainability side of it and the fact that, it was a breathable house and it had all these properties, but it was going to take too long, but also we wanted a house with very durable materials and that was quite low maintenance. So we're going to be spending a lot of time outside in our yard, working on our yard and spending money, creating beds and planting. And so we didn't want to have a house that was going to be high maintenance. In our previous house, we had a lot of wooden windows and doors, which means sanding and painting regularly. So we've gone with materials that are very easy to look after. So we've got a colour blonde clad house, and we've gone with a steel frame because we have termites here. Termites are a massive issue. So those two things are durable and low maintenance. They might not be the most eco-friendly, but it's going to be sitting here for a long time, and if we look after it, this house will last well into the future. We also had to factor in skill set. So we don't have a lot of building skills. My parents renovated houses a lot, so I've got some renovation skills, but I can't build the house myself. So we need to factor that into our time, but also our budget, the fact that we need to be hiring professionals because we can't do it all ourselves. There's a lot of skills we could definitely learn, but again, it comes down to that time factor. And if we do fuck it up, we have to pay for it all over again. So it's the money side of things as well. We have had to really push hard for our BAL, our BAL rating, our fire rating here. So because across the road is yet to be developed, there's a lot of trees, and they wanted to put it a sort of really high BAL rating, which meant we would have had to meet certain conditions for the types of materials we use. We couldn't have a timber deck. We would have to use particular windows. There's a few things that would have been dictated to us, but we pushed back on them saying, well, that's not going to be like that forever. Houses will be going in the next year or two, and we were able to reduce our BAL by doing that. So that was really helpful. That's something to factor in, especially if you are in a rural or bushy area. So yeah, we just kind of had to think about all these things. You don't really think about it too much when you're in an existing house, but these are things that you definitely have to learn about very quickly when you start to build. Some of the other things we had to think about was, from a permaculture perspective, how water flowed on our block and the slope of our block. So to the naked eye, our block looks very, very flat. There's a slight slope from the back to the front where the back's higher. But then cost-wise, we wanted to just dig down a little bit to make the slab completely even and level. However, water-wise, it was better to raise that up because we get a lot of rain here. We didn't want the slab to be compromised. There will be a lot of swales and things behind the house, so we didn't want that water sinking in and then causing issues. But that did come at a massive price difference. So it was about $6,000 more expensive to build the pad up than to just cut in and put the slab down. That was one thing that we weren't expecting that did cost more money. So that means that we will have to compromise in a different area to make up for that that shortfall of money that we're going to have. But it was really important to us because we know that water is a massive issue on our block. All the blocks behind us run onto us, so we cop all of their water as well as the water that falls onto our block when it does rain. So we've put in drains as well at the back of the block to help move that water where we want it to be going and have some kind of influence over where it ends up. We've also said no to a lot of high-tech, expensive green solutions that just aren't cost effective and that we think we didn't really need. So we did look into like a passive house where you get a rating where everything's sealed in, and I think they're quite beneficial in places that are cold. But again, we're not going to have that issue. We actually wanted more airflow and to be able to open the house up as much as possible, and the cost of installing a system like that for us just wasn't going to be worth it. I know a lot of people get their money back on passive house design because it saves in your heating and cooling, but for where we are and where we're located, we just didn't think it was the smartest investment for our money. And also we had to say no to some materials because they didn't meet that fire bowel rating. So even though we got it lower, it is still quite a high rating, and we have had to be careful about what materials we use for the windows, the decking and the cladding of the house. There were restrictions on us because of our bowel rating. So that's kind of just my brain dump of stuff we've initially kind of started to do and thought of for the property and the build. I will go into part 2 of things we're deciding to do in the build to try and come at it from a permaculture perspective and a more sustainable lens next week in our second week of our season break. And then the week after, we'll be back on board for season 6 of the Practical Permaculture podcast. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you next week.